The knock came just after dawn. Not a gentle tap, not the friendly rhythm of a neighbor borrowing sugar. No, this was a hard, authoritative pounding that shook the front door of my ranch like it owed someone money. I was already up, black coffee in one hand, staring out over my land as the fog rolled low through the valley. Whiskey, my German shepherd, was already on his feet, tail rigid, ears perked. He didn't bark. He didn't have to. That knock didn't belong out here. I set the mug down slow, pulled on my boots, and walked to the door, and there they were, 3 of them. Khaki uniforms, knock-off badges, mirrored sunglasses despite the dim morning light. One had a clipboard, another, a holstered sidearm that sat too high and loose on his belt. Not regulation, not even close. The man in the middle stepped forward. "Sir," he said, voice full of borrowed authority. "We're with the Sunset Valley HOA Compliance Enforcement. We've received reports that you're in violation of Article 4, Section B, unauthorized possession of firearms within HOA grounds." I stared. "Firearms?" "Yes, sir. Shotguns specifically. We're here to confiscate them. For safety." I didn't move. I didn't blink. Because this wasn't just nonsense. It was dangerous nonsense. First of all, there is no HOA out here. Not legally. They've tried to claim jurisdiction for years, sending mailers, threats, fees, but I never signed their covenant. Never gave them permission to step one dusty boot on my land. And second, who sends an enforcement team that looks like rent-a-cops from a strip mall security firm? I scanned their fake badges again. The one on the left was sweating. The one on the right had his thumb twitching near his belt. The man in the middle smiled like a snake. "You can make this easy, sir. Just hand over the weapons, and we'll file it as cooperative." I took a long breath. Then I stepped outside, real slow, closing the door behind me. The sun was rising behind the mountains, casting the land in gold. It reminded me of the desert, where I first learned how to move without sound, how to track in pitch dark, how to disarm a man twice my size without making a noise. "You said you're with the HOA. I said finally. "That's correct. And you've got legal authority to disarm me on my own ranch?" "Yes, sir. That's what the code says." "What code?" He faltered for a half second. "Section B, Article." I meant, what state code? What law? He blinked. The man on the right shifted his stance. "We're authorized through the HOA's private charter." I let the silence hang like a loaded rifle. Then I smiled. Not big, not warm, just enough to let him know that he'd stepped in it. "You boys picked the wrong ranch." I turned slightly and pointed to the ridgeline behind the barn. "See that radio tower?" They looked. "That's a direct line to Fort Bragg." The sweat on the left guy's brow turned to a drip. "I train U.S. Army Rangers. Special tactics. Close quarters. Firearms certification. You know what that means?" They didn't answer. "It means I wrote the playbook you're pretending to follow." I took a step forward, slow and deliberate. They backed up without meaning to. "You just impersonated federal enforcement. You attempted to violate my Second Amendment rights. And unless one of you has a real badge or a warrant signed by a judge, you've got 30 seconds to get off my land before this becomes something a lot more serious than a fake HOA complaint." The clipboard dropped. They turned fast, scrambling for their cheap SUV. The tires peeled out, throwing gravel. No apology, no explanation, just fear. I stood still until the dust settled. Then I walked back inside, locked the door, and picked up my coffee, still warm. Whiskey sat by my feet, tail thumping once. The thing is, this wasn't the first time someone had come after me. But this was different. This wasn't some fine in the mail or an angry letter. This was direct, personal, coordinated. And that meant only one thing. Someone had declared war, and they had no idea who they were messing with. The next morning I took a slow walk down the fence line. My boots crunched over dried mesquite and gravel. A soft breeze rolled across the hills, carrying the scent of cedar and sun-scorched soil. It was the kind of peace you fight to protect, but something was off. A sign had been planted just beyond the boundary of my property, near the old cattle gate that hadn't been used in years. Fresh white paint, red bold letters, HOA jurisdiction zone. Trespassers will be penalized. I stared at it for a moment, lips tight. They were doubling down, trying to plant flags like this land was theirs. Like they could just rewrite borders with some metal stakes and a cheap sign from a printing shop. They had no idea. I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my phone, and called Stan, an old friend, real estate attorney and fellow Army vet. He picked up after one ring. "You seen the sign?" I asked. "I heard about it," Stan said, his voice like gravel and bourbon. "They filed a new annexation notice 2 days ago. Claim your property is now under HOA oversight. They can't just do that. They know it. It's a bluff, but a smart one. Looks official to people who don't know better. Makes it harder when they escalate." "Escalate," he sighed. I looked deeper. The guy calling shots now is Royce Talbot, new HOA president. Used to run shady land grabs out in Nevada. Real piece of work. I clenched my jaw. He's the one who sent those fake compliance officers yesterday. "They're not going to stop," Stan said, "unless you stop them." I hung up without another word. Back at the house, I opened the vault in the den. Deep in the wall, behind a Navajo blanket passed down 3 generations. Inside was everything I'd need. Documentation, maps, ownership deeds, original boundary, markers from the 1870s. Grandfathered in before HOAs even existed, and tucked beneath it all, my training manuals, the kind that weren't available to the public. Dozens of them. Each one signed by a different general, a reminder of who I was, who I still was. You don't spend a decade teaching rangers how to clear rooms and assess hostile threats and then forget how to deal with a bully in a blazer. Later that day, I drove into town. Whiskey Road shotgun, head out the window, eyes alert. I stopped by the county recorder's office first, pulled every land survey, plat map, and HOA charter on file. Then I headed to the sheriff's department. Sheriff Darnell met me out front, arms folded, brow furrowed. "I heard about the visit," he said. "They impersonated officers. Tried to take my guns. Filed fake jurisdiction signs." He nodded slowly. "Problem is, they've got just enough paperwork to confuse the courts. You know how these HOA boys work. Slow erosion. One claim here, one fence post there." I looked him square in the eye. "Not on my land." His eyes hardened. "You want me to deputize anyone?" I cracked a small smile. "Not yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I reviewed everything, every document, every land patent. I memorized Talbot's name, his prior addresses, the companies he used to run. He wasn't just a schemer. He was methodical, used shell corporations and legal loopholes to exhaust his victims until they gave up. But I wasn't built to give up. I was built to outlast. At dawn, I was back at the gate. I dug up the fake sign and laid it flat on the ground. Then I planted my own. Private ranch, U.S. military training ground. Trespass at your own risk. Legally accurate. I still had active contracts with the Department of Defense for tactical simulations and field testing. Let them try and argue that in court. Later that afternoon, a black Escalade pulled up just outside my fence. Tinted windows, polished chrome. It idled for a moment, then the back door swung open. Royce Talbot stepped out, slick gray suit, white teeth, sunglasses that cost more than my truck. He didn't wave, just walked up to the fence like he already owned it. "You've got quite a setup here," he said, eyes scanning the land. "It's mine," I replied flatly. "Not for long," he said. "You're standing in the way of progress. We're developing this area, raising property values, cleaning up. This land doesn't need cleaning." He laughed, low and arrogant. "You think your military contracts make you untouchable? You're just a stubborn old cowboy with a few guns and some nostalgia." I stepped forward, close enough he could feel it. "I'm the kind of cowboy who trained men to breach terrorist strongholds with nothing but a combat knife and grit. The kind who taught snipers how to read wind by the way the grass bends at dawn." He hesitated, just for a second. Then I leaned in. "You ever wonder why this ranch hasn't been taken? Why, after all your bluffs, your signs, your fake cops, I'm still here?" He didn't answer. "Because I'm not just fighting for my home," I said. I'm fighting to make sure guys like you don't ever win. Royce smiled, cold and shallow. Enjoy your little victory. We'll see how long it lasts. He turned and walked back to the Escalade. As it pulled away, Whiskey barked twice, low and warning, and I knew. They weren't finished, not even close. The rain came down hard that night, thick, relentless sheets that drummed on the tin roof like warning shots. Lightning cracked the sky in wild bursts, casting everything in flashes of white and shadow. But even the storm couldn't drown out the sound that woke me. Tires, grinding over gravel, more than one vehicle. I rose without hesitation. I'd learned, long ago, to keep certain things ready by the door: boots, coat, flashlight, and the Remington 870 leaning quietly against the wall. Whiskey was already growling by the time I opened the door. 3 trucks. Black, no markings. Engines running. They didn't park on the road. They came right up the driveway, onto my land. I stepped out into the downpour as the first door opened. Flashlights clicked on, beams slicing through the rain. Men stepped out, 6 of them, tactical vests, masks, no badges, unmarked, but not untrained. They spread out like they knew what they were doing, but I knew more. The leader approached, hand raised like he was keeping things peaceful. "Evening," he called out. "You're in violation of HOA curfew policy. We've come to inspect for unauthorized firearms and non-compliant structures." "No badges," I said. "No warrant." "Authority comes from the HOA charter." "You think I give a damn about your charter?" I said, stepping off the porch, slowly racking the shotgun. The sound sliced through the night like thunder. He didn't flinch, but the guy on his left did. "You're not law," I said. "You're private citizens, armed, on my land. That makes you trespassers, felony grade." He hesitated. Then his voice dropped. "You don't want this fight, old man." I didn't blink. Too late. You brought it to my door. Behind me, the porch light flickered. Motion sensor. Another vehicle had arrived, then 2 more. But they weren't part of the gang. I smiled. The cavalry had come. Stan pulled up in his rusted Ford, shotgun mounted in the window, followed by Sheriff Darnell and a second cruiser. The fake enforcers froze. Darnell stepped out, hand resting on his sidearm. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, voice full of venom. "Mind telling me why you're impersonating law enforcement on private property?" The leader turned, face still masked. "We're enforcing HOA regulations." "You're breaking about 5 state laws," Darnell said, stepping closer. "Unlawful assembly, armed trespass, attempted coercion. Want me to keep going?" One of the masked men started backing away. I walked closer, water dripping from the brim of my hat. "You came out here thinking I'd roll over, that I'd hand over my rights, my guns, my land. You brought weapons and threats, hoping fear would do what the courts couldn't." The leader looked at me. "You don't know what you're messing with." "No," I said. "You don't." Sheriff Darnell pulled his cuffs. "On the ground, all of you." No one moved, until Whiskey barked, sharp and loud. The kind of bark that said, "We won't ask twice." That did it. One by one, the fake HOA cops dropped their weapons and went to their knees. Darnell cuffed the leader himself. "Name?" He asked. "Jack Weathers," the man muttered. "Private security contractor." Darnell raised an eyebrow. "For who?" He didn't answer, but I already knew. "Talbot. This wasn't just about land. It wasn't even about money anymore. This was a power grab, a full-on campaign to control every inch of the valley and crush anyone who stood in the way." Back inside, I sat by the fire, soaked to the bone but wired with energy. Stan poured me a drink. "They're gonna regroup," he said. "Try to hit. You with legal maneuvers next. Paperwork war." "Let them," I said. "Talbot's got friends," Stan warned. "Judges, inspectors, lawyers. You're up against a machine." I stared into the flames. "Good," I said quietly. "I like machines. They break easier when you know where to hit them." And right then, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just defend the ranch. I was going to expose the HOA, take down Talbot, and remind everyone in Sunset Valley that there are still people who won't back down. no matter what it costs. 2 days passed. The valley quieted, but it wasn't peace. It was a silence that hums before a storm, tight, humming with tension. Talbot hadn't shown his face, but his presence lingered like poison in a well. Stan and I were in the barn, rolling out blueprint maps and zoning charts, when he said, "You ever think about hitting him first?" I looked up. Hitting how? Land. Records. Tax filings. Old HOA minutes. If he's hiding something, it'll be there. The man's built his empire on intimidation and loopholes. But even snakes leave trails. I nodded. Then let's follow it. That night, I drove to the county. Clerk's office, flashlight in hand, copying machine under my arm. Clerk owed me a favor. Years ago, I'd pulled his son from a flipped Jeep during a thunderstorm. Never asked for anything in return. Until now. In the dusty back room, I dug through 2 filing cabinets marked inactive properties. What? I found turned my stomach. Royce Talbot didn't own the HOA's central building. Not fully. The plot it stood on had been parceled off from my land decades ago, but the land lease had never been finalized. No purchase agreement. No signed deed. Just a paper trail of confusion and assumptions. In legal terms, I still owned the dirt under their fortress. The very headquarters from which Talbot ran his operation, issued fines, threats, and fake law enforcement raids, stood on my property. I copied everything. By morning, I was standing on that very property, right in front of the HOA building. Sunlight spilled across the pavement like a spotlight. I wasn't alone. I'd called in some friends, veterans, ranchers, neighbors, the people Talbot had bullied in the shadows for years. We stood there, silent and still, like ghosts of a past he'd tried to erase. Then I posted it, on the front door, in bold, notarized letters. Notice of immediate eviction. Structure located on privately owned land without consent of owner. People stopped, took pictures, called friends. By noon, half the valley had seen it. HOA board members began showing up, shouting, arguing, threatening lawsuits, but I had the deed. The sheriff arrived shortly after. He read the paper. Read it again. Looked me in the eye. "You're serious?" Dead serious. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. This wasn't about law anymore. It was about truth. By evening, Talbot finally appeared, surrounded by lawyers in silk ties, and a film crew he probably hired to make himself look like the victim. "This is harassment," he shouted. "You think this stunt makes you righteous? You're breaking state code." I stepped forward, paper still in hand. "You've broken people's peace, Royce. You've bullied families, stolen their time, their money, their dignity. You sent armed men onto my land like it was a battlefield. Now you're standing on soil that was never yours to begin with." He tried to wave it off. "This will never hold up in court." I smiled. "Then I guess I'll see you in court." He turned, jaw tight, but the cameras caught everything. And this time, he was the one on the defensive. By sundown, the HOA building was shuttered, their operations paused, pending legal review. But we all knew what that meant. The dam had cracked, and water was rushing in. That night, around the fire pit out back, whiskey curled up beside me. The stars above shimmered bright. No haze, no sirens, no false curfews. Stan raised his glass. "You just declared war." "No," I said, staring into the flames. "I just drew the line." And I knew Talbot wouldn't let it end here. But now the ground beneath his kingdom was mine, literally, and I was ready to fight for every inch. The weeks that followed moved like a chess match. One move, one counter, the board growing darker. By the day, Talbot didn't retreat. He adapted. His lawyers filed a temporary injunction to reclaim the HOA building. They argued adverse possession, community benefit, and 100 other hollow phrases meant to twist the law in his favor. But I didn't sit idle. I hired my own legal team. Not corporate suits. I called in veterans-turned attorneys. People who'd fought wars in courtrooms and deserts alike. People who knew what a land battle truly meant. The courtroom hearings began. Quiet, cold, sterile. But beneath the surface, every word carried the weight of legacy, pride, and pain. Talbot sat there smug, flanked by counsel, sipping water like a man waiting for a round of applause. But when my attorney unveiled the original land surveys, the voided deeds, the missing signatures, and the 1979 tax exemption tied directly to my family's name, that smug smile cracked. The judge leaned forward. "You're telling me the HOA's main headquarters sits on land that legally still belongs to the plaintiff?" "Yes, Your Honor," my lawyer said. "It was never properly acquired. The structure was erected under assumed ownership, but the foundational deed was never transferred. And he has documentation proving this?" "Stamped and verified, sir." Silence filled the room. Talbot whispered furiously to his lawyer. They requested a recess. Outside, the tension was electric. The media had gotten wind of the story. Local reporters, then state outlets. It went viral. Headlines read, "Rancher battles HOA tyranny and wins." People who'd never met me sent letters. Veterans, farmers, city folks fed up with being pushed around by red tape and bad power. But for me, it was still personal. I wasn't fighting for fame. I was fighting because they came to my home, lied, tried to take what they didn't earn, and they thought I'd just fold. That's the part they never understood. I was born on this ranch, raised by a father who fought in Korea and a mother who never let winter storms stop her from milking the cows before dawn. My roots were in this land. My blood was in the soil. No boardroom bully could rewrite that. The final verdict came on a cold, dry morning. The courtroom was packed. Cameras, journalists, local townsfolk. Talbot sat in the front, jaw locked. The judge read slowly, clearly, letting every word hang in the air. The court finds that the property in question was never lawfully transferred. All operations by the Sunset Valley HOA conducted on this land are henceforth suspended. Immediate eviction and property surrender are ordered. Furthermore, he continued, violations, fines, criminal referrals for impersonation of officers and use of illegal enforcement tactics. The gavel came down, and that was it. Victory. But it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a release. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed. I didn't say much, just one sentence. "You don't have to fight every battle, but you should always fight the ones on your front porch." In the weeks that followed, the HOA collapsed like a wet paper wall. Once the building was shut down, their authority vanished. Homeowners stopped paying dues. Board members resigned. Their power, built on fear, dissolved once the lies were exposed. Talbot? He disappeared from town. Word was he moved to the city. Tried to start a new development firm under a different name. But people knew better now. His reputation was shattered. As for me, I didn't rebuild the HOA building. I turned the plot into something else, a community garden, raised beds, native flowers, benches made from old fence posts, no gates, no rules, just a space for people to breathe, to grow, to remember what freedom feels like. Every Sunday, folks gather there, veterans, kids, retirees. We swap stories, share seeds, laugh, over bad coffee and better memories. Sometimes someone brings up what happened. "How'd you win, really?" they ask. And I tell them the truth. I didn't win with lawyers, or documents, or courts. I won the day I stopped being scared of them. That's all it takes. Just one person who says no and means it. Whiskey lies beside me under the oak. Tree near the old barn. The ranch hums with life, quiet, real and raw. And for the first time in years, Sunset Valley feels like home again. Not just mine. Ours. No boards. No masks, no threats, just the land and the people who love it. The fight is over, but the story remains. So no one ever forgets, if you stand your ground even against giants, eventually they fall.